Stephanie Alexander is a wife, a mother, an attorney, and an author of the Crack Slipper series in Charleston Green. I talk one-on-one with Stephanie for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Stephanie Alexander, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. You are a published author, and I understand that you love drawing, you love writing stories, and I know as a child, you harassed your parents for a pony for much of your childhood. Besides writing these days, what's consuming you these days?
Well, I'm also a full-time attorney, so I'm a family court attorney, and things in the pandemic have been a little crazy. You know, it's been kind of on and off. The courts have been closed some, and so that takes up a lot of my time. And then I also have, I have 5 kids. I have 3 kids, and my husband has 2. So my oldest daughter just got into college, so we're doing that. But yeah, just keeping busy and writing the sequel to my last novel. So.
And what is the biggest difference between the last novel and this one right here?
Well, the one I'm writing right now is a sequel to Charleston Green. And so it's really just a continuation of the protagonist in that book's story, her personal journey, kind of going through divorce and rebuilding her life. So that's pretty much what the book, the second book is. And there will probably be one more book about this particular character. So it'll be a trilogy.
Oh man, and I'll talk more about that in a second. What has been your personal journey, obviously now as a mother, your wife, you're a family court attorney, and an author? What has that been like for you? What type of title would you write for your life?
God, I don't know. Jack of all trades, master. Yeah, so, you know, I personally went through a divorce, so a lot of my work is, you know, kind of feeds into those themes about like expectations in life and how we think things are going to be a certain way and then maybe they turn out another way. And so a lot of my books have those kinds of themes, like once life isn't exactly how you think it might be, like what do you do with that and how do you adjust, and kind of finding the silver lining, which for me there's always been a silver lining even during difficult times. You come out the other side and things are a lot better than you think they would have been. So yeah, that's been kind of my personal journey, and I'm even still, you know, I'm still evolving through that.
Right.
Like I first wrote Charleston Green, the first draft, probably like 6 years ago, and even now the second novel about this character is a growth for her because it's been a growth for me, you know, since I wrote that first book.
And where did your growth begin as an author?
Well, I mean, it's funny because people ask me, like, did I always know I wanted to be an author? And I really kind of didn't. I mean, I started reading adult novels when I was really young. Like I read my first Stephen King novel when I was like 10.
Wow.
So that was it. And now I'm like, why was my mom let me read that? I don't know. But yeah, so that was my first, you know, kind of big adult novel. And then I just read novels like voraciously, thousands of novels, like until I was like in my early 30s. And I kind of felt like I was getting to the point where I kept reading the same books that I really liked over and over again. And I wasn't finding a lot of stuff that was new that I liked. And I don't know, I just got the idea for my first novels, which were the Crack Slipper series, which is a fairy tale retelling. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to write this book. And once I started writing, it like really clicked for me. And at that point I was staying home full time with my kids. They were little. My kids were, when I first started writing the Crack Slipper, I think they were 2, 4, and 6. And it was something that I realized I really needed something for myself. Like I loved being home with my children, but I really needed something for myself. Sure. And I just kind of dove into that. And so it was kind of a roundabout way of getting there. It's not like I wasn't an English major in college. I was never like, you know, I mean, I like to write. That was my favorite part of like my education. I liked writing papers and things like that, but I never was like, oh my God, I want to write a novel. And then when I did, I was like, oh, this is like the greatest thing. I love doing this. So
what novel? Right. And what novel are you writing right now?
Well,
I'm sorry. What novel are you actually reading, I should say?
You know, it's funny because right now I'm actually I'm doing what's called beta reading, which means another author has asked me to read a kind of, not a first draft, but like she's at a place with one of her books where she's like, I need somebody to read this and give me some feedback on it. So I'm actually reading a book for a friend of mine. That's a book, she writes novels kind of similar to mine, and we trade our manuscripts back and forth. So she just finished reading beta reading my new novel, and I'm beta reading her new novel. So it's kind of, I don't get honestly that much time anymore to read a lot. Like, I wish I had more time to read for pleasure, but between work and writing my own stuff and helping other authors and stuff, I don't have a ton of time to read, just like go to Barnes and Noble and like grab a novel. I mean, I do that, but it's not as much as I used to. So yeah, right now I literally am reading another author's manuscript for her.
And when you first became a published author, who did you send your manuscript to say, hey, can you give me some feedback on this?
Yeah, so the process is kind of interesting. You have to get a literary agent. That's a big thing. And it's actually very difficult because it's kind of like cold calling. You basically like, all these different literary agents, most of them are in New York, although some of them are in California these days. And you basically like email them like a little summary of your book, and they will literally read like, 200 words and say, yeah, I'd like to see this, or no, I won't. And like a good agent, they might get 10,000 pitches a year and take on like 2 or 3 new clients. So you're literally like pitching and pitching and pitching and pitching. And it's it's not a fun process. It's a lot of rejection. But I'm fortunate that I have a great agent. And so she was one of the first people that read Charleston Green. I just, sent her a query and I said, this is this book. What do you think? Would you like to see more? And she's like, yes. And then she picked it up. And so she gives me a lot of really great feedback because she's kind of in the trenches every day, like seeing, what is selling, what's appealing, what's hot right now. Like, and she can be very objective. And since I really value her opinion, this is a very personal like industry. It's like putting your children out there to be criticized. So it can be hard. I mean, you really have to develop a thick skin. But with someone like her, I just respect her opinion so much that whatever she tells me, I'm like, yes, like that's great. Let's do that. So that's kind of been part of that process. And then if you're lucky, you can meet other authors. A lot of it is through social media. And then you can ask somebody to like, would you be willing to read this book for me? And if you like it, would you be willing, like to put a little, your name on the top saying, I love this book. It's great. Like, and so I've been lucky to have some really nice authors like Ellen Hildebrand and Christy Woodson Harvey. They're like best-selling authors who've written little blurbs for me saying they like my work, which is like super flattering.
And how did you pitch yourself, Stephanie, in the beginning?
How did I pitch myself?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, a lot of it is you really only get this little email that's like, it's not like you can send something to an agent and say, here, look at my Instagram and look at my website and look at this. Like, you really have to just put it out there. Like, this is my story. Here's my little like hook to catch your attention. Here's 5 sentences to tell you what the book is about. And, you have to do a lot of research because all these different agents, they all like different stuff. So that is really, you're really not even, I mean, you're pitching yourself in that like, if you have other books that have done well, or, for some people, you might have an MFA from like a great school, or, you might have, maybe you knew another author who said like, contact my agent. But really it's just about, the biggest thing is just like your pitch, because these people are so busy. Like if they do not look at your, idea and say, oh, that's a great idea. And then, they'll usually ask you for some sample pages. And if they don't like the work in the first like 2 or 3 pages, they'll be like, nope, sorry, I'm going to pass. So it's really about like having a hooky idea, like something where you can summarize it quickly and people are like, oh, that's great. That's a great idea. So yeah, that's kind of how I did it. And I was pretty fortunate that I had a high concept like idea that really kind of like worked for my agent. So
that's amazing. And you talk a lot about the women, obviously, because your website says you write enchanting, fantastical stories for thoughtful, modern women. Yeah. Who are those thoughtful, modern women you look up to these days?
Oh God, people I look up to these days. Well, I have to say the person I have looked up to the most in my entire life just passed away. And that's Ruth Vader Ginsburg. If you're talking about people that I really look up to, I mean, I just adore Ruth Vader Ginsburg. And as an attorney, as a woman, as a pioneer, I mean, and I was crushed when she passed away. So that's somebody that I just really, I really look up to. I mean, and I look up to anybody who's like brave enough to kind of speak out like she was. And as far as, other authors, there are a lot of like really supportive women's fiction authors who kind of help each other out. And, again, people like Ellen and Christy. And I hope to be in a position at some point where, I can help other authors in the same way people help me. Like I'm trying to help this woman by reading her novel. She's a little bit further, I'm a little ahead of her in the process. So hopefully if I can read her novel and she can put my name saying Stephanie Alexander likes this book, then people who've read my books will read her books. And, that's, yeah.
And what is that process like right now, Stephanie?
The process of which process? The process of
reading the manuscript, trying to get it published, getting feedback.
Yeah, it's been, the pandemic has been kind of weird for authors because, we really do usually try to do a lot of in-person events, and that's a way to connect with readers. Right. And so that has been really difficult. No book signings, no book launch parties. I have gone to meet with some book clubs and done wearing masks and stuff like that. And I've done Zoom book clubs and Zoom interviews like this one and things like that. But I would say that all authors have really had to kind of rethink the way that we do things. And there's a lot of people starting groups on social media and, things like that. But I think one thing is that a lot, people are home. So a lot of people are kind of reading more and they're, turning to books as like a comfort. So I think overall fiction sales have they haven't really gone down. They've kind of stayed the same through the pandemic, but it's just really hard to rethink how do we reach readers? And yeah, and there's a ton of activity on Instagram, books, they call it Bookstagram. There are a lot of people who are really into, reading, and they do a lot of their posts are all aesthetic, pretty pictures of books, and they do different themes, and these people have a lot of clout. So if you can get a big Bookstagrammer to review your book and post about it, that's a big deal. So it's a lot of time I feel like authors spend a lot of time trying to get in with these Bookstagram people. And that tends to be a younger audience, where then there are groups on Facebook, which tend to be older readers on Facebook. So yeah, it's that part takes a lot of time. You wish as an author you could just write books and be like, yay, I'm done. But there's a lot more that goes into it as far as marketing and stuff like that, which is kind of crazy.
And you talk about marketing. Who is your audience, Stephanie?
I feel like my audience is kind of a book club type audience, because my books are not, we try to strike this nice, it's called upmarket fiction, meaning, there's commercial fiction, which is romance novels and, kind of some of the crime thrillers, books that are very formulaic, some fantasy books, and some women's fiction that's a little more fluffy and light. And then there's literary books, which is books that win the Pulitzer Prize and the Booker Prize and those kinds of things. So you want to kind of hit the upmarket, which is kind of in between those two, meaning it's well written. It sounds silly, it's well written, but it also has a good plot and it has good character development, whereas the formulaic books are usually more plot driven. The literary books are more character driven. So, that's where a lot of the book club type books come in. And, I'm writing for an audience that wants to read, strong female protagonists. But I always put in life growth stories, growing through your life stories, but I always have some kind of magical or fantastical element in my books. The Crack Slipper is clearly a fairy tale retelling, and it kind of it has a high fantasy setting. So it's I always describe it's kind of like Jane Austen meets Harry Potter, it's this magical world, but the characters it's kind of a period piece, but the characters are very much dealing with things that people in in the Tudor court of England would have dealt with. Things everything has kind of a little bit of feminist over theme flowing through it, place of women and how women manage in a man's world. And then, so that has unicorns and dragons and all those kinds of kind of high fantasy, what you think of when you think of fantasy, talking animals, magicians, which is all that kind of stuff that you think of. And when you think of fantasy, Charleston Green is a little more, it's set in Charleston in modern times, but it's, it goes back to the 1920s some, but it's predominantly in modern times, but it has this ghost element where the protagonist is a clairvoyant and she can see ghosts. So all of my work is going to have some kind of fantastical element, because for me, that makes it more interesting. I don't know. I love that kind of stuff, but I don't really like to read like, genre fantasy is a little too much like same old, like, oh, here's the chosen one who's going to go on a quest. And, I don't want to really read any of that kind of stuff. But I think like a lot of, younger women who maybe grew up reading Harry Potter novels, and now they're, in their 20s and 30s or whatever, and they're like, they love the magical element, but they want something that's a little more mature. I think a lot of that is probably a solid audience for me. And just anybody who's in a book club and wants to read something that has meaning, but is also kind of fun because it has these fantastical elements to it.
Yes, indeed. And speaking of which, your award-winning latest novel, Charleston Green, is an exploration of women's everyday trials and tribulations with a hefty dose of Southern charm and supernatural intrigue. How does Southern charm solve those everyday trials and tribulations?
Well, so one of my fun stories is that I went to the College of Charleston. I'm originally from Maryland. Yep,
Right.
there it is.
I'm right. Yes.
I'm originally from Maryland, and when I got to college in the mid 90s, most people were from South Carolina. I was kind of the odd person out, being from Maryland, and I was put in the dorm with a bunch of girls from Walterboro. So, and I just loved these people, and they were so welcoming, and I used to go and stay in Walterboro with them and the Christmas holidays, and we lived together all throughout college. And they just told the best stories. I mean, it's part of their culture, people from small Southern towns. It's really part of their culture. Everything is like so overblown and dramatic in like a funny way. And, every night was like the craziest night. I mean, it's just, so I take a lot of that kind of storytelling, like the Southern storytelling, and put it into this book. So it's a lot of like Charleston is still kind of a small town. I mean, it's growing so much, but everyone's connected to everyone.
Right.
So there's always a lot of like drama, and, people are, oh, so-and-so drinks too much, and so-and-so's cheating on their husband, and so-and-so's doing this, so-and-so's doing that. But like all this like drama that becomes almost like you can address it in a way that is like humorous.
Yes.
So I think it's almost like part of Southern culture to like tell stories, and also like, parade your crazy around a little bit, so that's kind of that's where the Southern, I think like the Southern charm in the novel like comes into play. Just dealing with life in a way that's like, I don't know, like you don't like, on one hand, we all try to seem like we're these perfect Southern, families, and everyone's all perfect, but you scratch below that, and there's a lot of like crazy stuff going on. So.
Yes. And I know Mount Pleasant is the scene of the novel Charleston Green. What's so green about Mount Pleasant?
Well, so, I decided to set it in Mount Pleasant because, I've lived in Mount Pleasant for a long time. I live on Daniel Island right now, but I did live in Mount Pleasant for a long time. And, I just kind of wanted to get away from, everybody thinks of Charleston, they think of downtown.
Right.
Which their downtown still does play a central role in this book, but I just wanted to set it in a place where I felt like more, for lack of a better word, like more normal everyday Charleston people live in Mount Pleasant, rather than like the people living in the mansions on Battery. Not that that's not lovely, but I kind of wanted to set it in an area that would maybe readers weren't as familiar with. And I love the old village of Mount Pleasant is still historic, and it's really beautiful. So. Yes.
Yeah, I ran through there in August. So amazing every time I go over there. And I know the New York Times bestselling author Eline Hildebrand, that is, praises Charleston Green as, quote, skillful and clever and funny. Kirkus Reviews calls it an enchanting novel of a woman finding her way out of a midlife and mid-death crisis. How have you been able to find your way out of a midlife crisis as an author, and as obviously a wife and a mother?
Yeah, well, through a lot of it is through writing. I went through a divorce in my mid 30s, and it's really the kind of experience that is, terrible. It's one of the most painful things you can go through, whether you want it or don't want it. But it's also like a chance for like tremendous growth and like self-reflection. And I'm also a family court attorney, so I see people going through these challenges and transitions all the time. And there's very few people that I work with as an attorney who I feel like I almost always feel like once people get through it, they're better off, even if they don't think they are. And so, I mean, I look back now on like when I was writing The Cracked Slipper, when I was still in my first marriage, and I think I was working through different things in my own life, like through writing those books. And then Charleston Green definitely comes from my own personal experiences of how to like rebuild your life when you got married young and you have kids and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do professionally and how to balance it all. And even like, dating when you haven't dated since you were much younger. I mean, that's a culture shock, back into that world. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like my novels have really kind of helped me in my own personal growth arc,
And I know that obviously your personal experience rebuilding your life after divorce inspires both your legal work and obviously fiction. You published obviously your second edition of The Cracked Slipper and the sequel, The Dragon Choker, in early 2020 of this year. The series is now complete with the release of a final book in the series called The Glass Rainbow in April 2020. What else is actually inspiring you these days, Stephanie?
I'm being inspired by this, this story of this woman, then Charleston Green, the protagonist. But I kind of think I'm going to put her aside on the side burner for a little bit and write a story that's kind of inspired, honestly, by my friends from Walterboro when I was in college. And something about these people who I feel like I see, we're all in our 40s now, and they're still so close to each other, even though, they grew up together and they maintain these like really tight friendships. And so I think I'm kind of exploring writing a novel around that kind of dynamic, like a group of friends who've been friends for so long and now they're adults and, like where are they all? And yeah, kind of exploring that right now.
Oh, that's amazing. And obviously you wrote The Cracked Slipper, that is, The Dragon Choker, The Glass Rainbow, if I can speak today. Which one describes Stephanie Alexander?
You mean of those three books?
Yes, ma'am.
I feel like, it's funny because those books follow the main character from the time she was 18 until she was in her mid 30s. So that's a long stretch for three books. It covers about an 18-year period of her life. So I think there's elements of me in all of those books going from, my own kind of, she starts out as a very like kind of naive, idealistic, slightly socially awkward person, which I probably was at that age, as many people are. And then she kind of comes into her own in the final book. So I think that all three of those books, because it's such a long period of time, I mean, I can see the arc of, anybody's life, but, I look back on that character, particularly when I first started writing those books. And, I was probably even then, in my early 30s, I mean, I was probably a little naive, I mean, I feel like, I'm about to be 44 next month. And now I look back and be like, oh, look at that. It's so, when I read it, I'm like, oh, it's so sweet. Like, really? That's what I thought, but it just, it's just like, I'm sure that anybody who writes books over like long periods of time is going to feel that way about their earlier work. You still see yourself in it, but it's an earlier version of yourself, I think.
Wow. And where do you see yourself in your earlier life?
Just in my, I mean, gosh, I mean, got married really young and had children really young. And I feel like I had 3 kids by the time I was 30. And I think I just, that was the right thing for me to do at the time. But, gosh, I'm like, I feel like I kind of skipped over like being like a young, free person in my 20s, just doing whatever I wanted to do and like traveling and exploring and stuff like that. So maybe, you do it all again to have your same children, but I don't want my own kids to do that. I want them to like,
right.
Have a little bit more time to like find themselves before they jump into, my daughter is almost 18 and I was 26 when I had her. So I look at her and I go, wow, I was only 8 years older than she is now. And that is crazy to me. So yeah, my younger self needed to like slow down a little bit. Stop and smell the roses a little bit more, I think.
Yes, indeed. No worries about that. It happens to all of us. Yeah. And I know your best-selling fantasy trilogy, The Cracked Slipper series, is a fractured fairy tale set in a world of magic and wonder, as you just mentioned earlier, but with a surprisingly relatable Heron. What's that world like right now?
So, well, I mean, you mean Eleanor's, like the world of that story?
Yes, ma'am.
I mean, I love that world because as somebody who grew up with like a wild imagination and, I love Harry Potter and I love Lord of the Rings movies. And I read, a lot of fantasy books when I was much younger. Like one of my first books that I loved was Watership Down, which is a book about rabbits, but it's like talking rabbits and they have their own little like culture and everything. And I mean, I just love those kinds of stories. So I wanted to write a Cinderella story that kind of gave the real story of Cinderella. Like her life was not happily ever after. It actually ended up being very complicated because the way I thought about it was like, she had an abusive childhood and she was, like secluded her whole life. And then all of a sudden she like marries this prince that she just met. And then like, this is supposed to be like a good thing, I mean, now she's like on the national stage and I mean, you can even look, people are fascinated right now with Princess Diana and like how it was for her, I mean, she was only 19. She married this guy. She's on the national stage. I mean, it's not a healthy scenario. And so I put that in a world that is very like whimsically fun with like all the magical stuff. And but Eleanor herself, the protagonist, is thinking deeply about all these different things. Like, where do I fit in? What, trying to climb the social ladder, and does my husband really love me? And, is he cheating on me? And like, all these different things. And then she has a child, and how does she be a good parent while she's trying to help run a country and like all these different things. But to make it like more fun, she has a unicorn that is like her own unicorn. I always wanted a unicorn. She has a parrot that like talks to her like, like a person. She, her teacher is a witch, and her, there's like an evil sorcerer who's trying to like come after her. I mean, it's just stuff that makes it more fun. And it's actually a very detailed world. Like it has its own holidays. It has its own religion. You really have to like, when you're creating that kind of like high fantasy world, you really have to like, I almost did like research in my own mind, where when I was writing I like came up with all the different like rules of the magic there. And, again, like the different cultural things and different cities that would be in her like little made up country, and like the geography of it and all those kinds of things that you really have to spend a lot of time like creating that world. Because even if you have magic, it can't just be that like everything is solved by magic. Like even the magic has to have like limitations. Like you can only do this, you can only do that, and you have to follow the rules that you make. So it can be kind of complex, but then once you put it all together, it literally becomes like this thing that you created, which is awesome. And so, yeah, I love her world. It's really cool.
And what were her limitations?
So, there are certain things like in her world, everything can't be solved by magic. And so basically kind of like there are witches and magicians, and they I kind of modeled them off of like, sounds weird, but like the Catholic Church system in the 1600s, where you had like the centralized power in Rome, and then you had, monasteries and convents. And so the different magicians and witches have different roles in society that they play. And Eleanor herself she's not a magical person. There's only certain people that are magic. Not everybody can use magic. And there are just limits to it. Like, it's not like you can just solve any kind of problem. It's not a place where people like make food appear or, it just, I don't know. There's just some limits to it. Like, I think a world like the Harry Potter world, the magic is more unlimited. Like people can pretty much do anything with it if they are magical. Whereas in my world, it's not like you can solve all of the world's problems by magic in this world, which is kind of hard to explain. But, like only so many magical spells can be happening at one time because it makes everything weaker. I don't know. Like, it's kind of hard to explain, but there's all these like limitations and rules that create problems that you have to solve. So it almost seems like if you have magic and you don't have any rules to it and everything can just be solved by magic, then why would anybody have any problems? There's no story if you can just solve any problem by magic.
And I know Publishers Weekly described the crack slipper as alluring, and readers have called it a fantastic find. What else can we find in these series?
I think the big thing is that just, you have this, I feel like most people, what they love about the book is the combination of the familiar, this idea that all women in particular are kind of fed this like I mean, we all grew up reading the Cinderella story, right? I mean, and you're kind of fed this idea that Prince Charming is going to come along and solve all your problems. And, you know, if you only are like sweet and kind and nice, you know, and because Cinderella is always described as this very like demure character who's just like patiently waiting and cleaning and doing all these things. And like, and then, you know, this guy comes along and like her problems are solved, you know, like everything's wonderful now. And, you know, we even build that up as women, like, you know, how people have these huge weddings and like all this stuff. And it becomes like, is it really about the wedding or is it really about like your life after the wedding? Because once you are a person who's married and has children, you realize that it does not get any easier after the wedding. It actually gets harder. So, you know, it's not like a happily ever after. And I think that most women, by the time they would be reading this book, will have had at least some of those experiences. Like, you know, whether you're 25 and you're still like, oh God, I'm like, you know, I don't even know, but like I'm on Tinder and this sucks. And when am I going to meet somebody nice? Or whether you're 36 and you have kids and you're like considering getting divorced, or you found out something is wrong about your, you know, your marriage. Like, it's just this idea that it's a familiar story and let's like make it real for the character who went through it. Like, she has a lot of like challenges and problems that come along in her, you know, everything from her husband being an alcoholic to, you know, so Prince Charming is like an alcoholic. Well, what do you do if Prince Charming is an alcoholic? You know, you're kind of stuck with him and you married him. So what are you going to do about it? And then again, like making it fun by creating all this like magical stuff. So it's like in one way she's relatable because of her internal problems, but in other ways it's an escape because, you know, she has a unicorn, you know?
Right. Well, Stephanie Alexander, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome to the award-winning Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you so much, Quintin. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Anytime.
Thanks.
You're welcome.